afternoon or good morning, everybody. My name is Joanna from Ziggurat Global Institute of Technology, and I hope you can hear me well. Alperine was saying that there was no audio, but we hadn't started yet. So I hope you can listen to us now. If you do have any technical issues, just feel free to use the chat or the question box in GoToWebinar. I'll be moderating this masterclass, so I'll be connected all the time, even if you cannot see me, and I'll be able to help you out with any technical issues or any questions you might have. I'll be the one reading them also. So we are here with Chris Diamond today. Welcome, Chris. Thank you for joining us. And Chris is a professor from our master program in Smart City Management. In the English edition, we have both an English edition and a Spanish edition. He just joined the English edition for this year, and he decided to talk. Well, we talked about using this Sidewalk Toronto example for today's masterclass. Once we know it's a kind of a nice project that everybody had a lot of hopes about, and it suddenly was a bit shocking how they just announced that it was going to disappear. No? So we decided to talk a bit about this today, and these master classes are a complement to our master programs. So this sessions serve as a complement to the classes of the masters, but it's also a way for us Ziggurat to show everybody they are open to public. So it's a way of us showing you how our classes look like. So that's why we invite our professors. Sometimes we do have guest speakers from companies or associations to bring here other kind of topics also, or specific projects. And this is what a class looks like at Ziggurat. So we have online sessions. Our master programs are all 1-year master programs with online sessions, in the case of the programs of smart cities. And we talk about, it's a very broad program. So in this case, we talk a bit about all the topics within smart cities, which is a big thing. And the idea is to give students this broad view of all the subjects so that they can manage projects that are related to smart cities, whatever the subject might be. So mobility or urbanism or water or whatever. So there's so many different subjects. So our master classes do have also a lot of different topics. In this case, we'll talk about a specific project. So feel free to write down any questions you might have, any doubts. And at the end of the session, we'll have a few minutes to talk about all your questions, to debate a bit. We will not interrupt Chris, but we will have time to discuss later. So feel free to write down. And I leave the floor to you, Chris.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everyone. Yeah, as Joanna said, my name's Chris Diamond. I specialize in digital development of places, so smart cities and digital infrastructure. I have a consultancy called Unfolding here in my home city of Sheffield. I'm also a co-founder of Sheffield Digital, which is the Association for Digital Industries in Sheffield. And I teach on this course for Ziggurat and also for Sheffield Hallam University on one of their master's programs as well. And yeah, I want to give you a taste of what it's like to be in one of my lectures. It's not quite the same as it would be ordinarily, because we're using a different platform for the video conference than we normally use, but it's essentially the same. And I want to talk about Sidewalk Toronto. I want to talk about the project, how it kind of came about, kind of an overview of the timeline and perhaps why it failed, or why Google or Sidewalk Labs decided to pull out in May this year, and what its legacy is, what we can learn from it as kind of smart cities professionals. I should say a caveat to start with that I have had nothing to do with the project professionally in any fashion. So I have have no skin in the game of this project. I'm a completely independent observer. But of course, to all of people like me who work in this field, we've been watching it quite closely for a number of years now to see how it's developed and the challenges it's faced. And so it seems like a good opportunity to bring that together and try and understand a little bit deeper about what happened and why it happened and what we can learn from it. So hopefully you can see my screen. So this is the topics I want to go through. I'm going to try and keep the presentation to under 40 minutes, so we kind of get 20 minutes or so to talk about the issues at the end. I'd rather do that than kind of present my analysis of why I think Sidewalk Labs pulled out in the end. But we can debate that when we come to the questions and answers. So I'm going to do an intro to those people who don't know about the project or don't know what it was about or what it entailed. I'm going to do a brief introduction to Sidewalk Labs, and then I'm going to go through kind of a more detailed timeline of events, picking out the key moments in the history of the project. Not everything, but the things that I think are probably the important moments. And then we're going to go through some key areas of debate. So, the kind of the themes that come out of this and where we might go hunting to find the deeper reasons for the failure of the project and what we can learn from it. And then, as I said, we'll do a Q&A at the end of it. Okay, so intro. So Quayside Toronto, this is the piece of land that this project is all focused on, and it's a little small dogleg of land on the southern tip of Toronto, within walking distance of the city centre. You can see on these maps, you've got Quayside here, this little area, and it's the shaded area on the closer in map. And it's part of this wider area of harbourfront, the Portlands here and Villiers Island, which is kind of a little bit further along. And all of this is kind of commonly known as the Eastern Waterfront, or it's known by Waterfront Toronto as the Eastern Waterfront. But the bit of land that is part of Quayside Toronto is just this little shaded area here. It's just 12 acres of brownfield old industrial land on the harbour front in Toronto. And so Toronto, the city of Toronto, through its development vehicle, Waterfront Toronto, or Waterside Toronto, decided they wanted to develop that piece of land, and they sought projects and proposals from developers who were going to come in and develop on it, turn it into or revitalize that area. And we'll go through in more detail when we look at the timeline that sequence of events. But essentially, they wanted to establish a complete community that improves the quality of life for a diverse population of residents, workers, and visitors in those 12 acres. So they wanted those 12 acres to be a completely functioning kind of city and microcosm. They wanted it to be a destination for people and companies, startups, and local organizations to advance solutions to the challenges facing cities, such as energy use, housing affordability, and transportation. So they wanted it to be a test bed. They wanted to make Toronto the global hub of a rising new industry called urban innovation. So that was the mission of this. And they wanted it to serve as a model for sustainable neighborhoods throughout the rest of Toronto and cities around the world. So it was supposed to be the exemplar smart city that could be replicated throughout the rest of Toronto, and especially out through that broader harbourfront area. The proposal that came in from Sidewalk Toronto, from the Google company that bid and won this contract, was essentially a traditional development strategy with an injection of a whole series of new technologies: clean energy, green building standards, automated building energy management, waste management for multi-tenanted buildings, smart water management, and a test bed for a whole range of other technologies, a vast range of them. I think 160 individual innovations and technologies were listed in the proposal, or certainly in the development plan later on. All of this effort was aiming for a 75 to 85% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. The planning documents were over 1,500 pages, and the total estimated cost of developing Quayside was about $1.3 billion Canadian dollars, which is pretty close to $1 billion US. These are some of the designs. A lot of the design of this new sort of micro city was based on wooden construction using local materials, sustainable Canadian wood, and developing new ways of producing that wood so it was weatherproof and a building material that would last and be suitable for building these structures with, including quite tall structures. There was the plan included the development of the world's tallest, or what would have been the world's tallest wooden structure at, I think, something like 32 or 37 floors. But these are kind of artist renderings at the proposal stage, essentially, of what they thought this could look like. And here's the diagram that was produced as part of the development plan a few years later. So this is that same geography with Sidewalk Labs designs shown on it. This is how it was intended to look. This is what was intended to be built. And again, as with most smart city plans, it consisted of a series of layers with infrastructure underneath, water supply and electricity supply, connectivity, wastewater, everything else. And then public realm over the top, mobility on top of that, mobility of goods and people, of course, the buildings, the built environment on top of that, public realm. Sorry, the built environment, and then the digital layer on top of that. So a layer of sensing and data capture about all of those systems that are in operation. So they adopted the class standard model for how cities are envisaged nowadays, or developments within cities are envisaged. And in May 2020, as Joanna said, Google, or Alphabet, the parent company of both Google and Sidewalk Labs, decided to pull out of the project entirely, 7th of May this year. And this is Daniel Doctoroff, who is the CEO of Sidewalk Labs, and he wrote an open letter explaining why they were pulling out, essentially in response to COVID-19. He said, "It's with great personal sadness and disappointment that I share that Sidewalk Labs will no longer pursue the Quayside project. But as unprecedented economic uncertainty has set in around the world and in the Toronto real estate market, it has become too difficult to make the 12-acre project financially viable without sacrificing core parts of the plan we have developed together with Waterfront Toronto to build a truly inclusive, sustainable community." So that's the reason given, and there's been no clarification of that since, as far as I'm aware. Neither Sidewalk Labs or Alphabet has said really anything else as to why specifically they decided to pull out. I mean, Doctoroff's letter goes on to say a few more things, which we'll get onto later on, but essentially that's the rationale for it. They couldn't make it work financially, and COVID-19 had a large role to play in that, as they looked at the forecast of the real estate market in both there and in the rest of Toronto. But we'll also see why that may or may not be the whole reason. Okay, so that's the project in a nutshell. Basically, the idea of building the world's most advanced test bed for urban design and technology integration. Let's go through the timeline, because this will put a lot of this in context. So I'm not going to spend too much time on each of these. As I say, I don't want to spend the whole hour talking about individual points, because I want us to understand the bigger picture. But it kind of starts with 2001 with the founding of Waterfront Toronto, the public advocates and stewards of Toronto's waterfront revitalization. It's a tri-government partnership, Canada, Ontario and Toronto itself, each providing seed capital to Waterfront Toronto initially to help develop the waterfront. 2015, Sidewalk Labs is founded. It's founded by Google parent company Alphabet to reimagine cities from the internet up. That's what they That's their big mantra when they started. It supposedly came about through a conversation between Larry Page, the co-founder of Google, and Michael Bloomberg, the ex-mayor of New York, in which Larry Page was explaining to Michael Bloomberg how cities were still lagging behind in their technology adoption and their real understanding of the power of technology to transform how people live and improve people's lives. So Sidewalk Labs was set up as a response to that, to kind of push the envelope of technology integration in cities and new innovations that improve the lives of citizens. It was co-founded and led by Daniel Doktoroff. He was an economic development executive from New York City. He's the guy who led Bloomberg's bids for New York City to become Olympic host in 2008 and 2012. And they have a mission to combine urban design and digital technology to radically improve urban life. They were looking from the outset for a place to try this stuff out. So they were on the hunt from the day they were founded to find a good city partner to try out some of the whole range of ideas and innovations that they brought together from the world's leading urbanists and urban technologists. In 2016, Sidewalk Labs were invited to Toronto to view Quayside. So this is a photo of what Quayside looks like. It probably looks like that today, because no work has really been carried out. And you can see how kind of difficult or awkward a space it is, really, between that big freeway and the harbour. So in March 2017, Waterfront Toronto issues their RFP, so a request for proposals seeking an innovation and funding partner for the Quayside development opportunity. The scope is sustainability, resiliency, and urban innovation to create a globally significant demonstration project that advances a new market model for climate positive urban developments. That's how they phrased it. For complete communities, to establish a complete community that emphasizes quality of place and provides a range of housing types for families of all sizes and income levels within a robust mix of uses. Economic development and prosperity, to provide a test bed for Canada's clean tech, building materials, and broader innovation-driven sectors to support their growth and competitiveness in global markets. So economic development and being the site of this new urban technology cluster was a really key part of this RFP. And partnership and investment. So develop a new partnership model that ensures a solid financial foundation, manages financial risk, and secures revenue that funds future phases of waterfront revitalization. So it was supposed to be revenue generating in those 12 acres was supposed to show that it was possible to generate revenue that could be translated into development of the rest of the eastern waterfront. And it was supposed to be one of several RFPs, because infrastructure design and delivery partners were supposed to be procured through the next round of procurement, and then the real estate development partners themselves to build the plans was supposed to go through another RFP process as well. So this was just stage one in a whole series of processes that would result in gradual development of the site and the extension further. So yeah, so we can see these, this is the diagram that's inside the RFP. We can see how awkward this land is. It's quite clear that the Portlands and Villiers Island, so the rest of that eastern waterfront, is out of scope of this RFP. But the indication is that Quayside is a pilot project for development along the rest of the waterfront. September 2017, so when was this? This was in March. So by September, Sidewalk Labs had been selected as the innovation and funding partner. The vision, as Doktoroff said in their response, represented a snapshot in time of our ideas about how to create a place that deployed emerging technology, people-first design innovations to address the challenges that face growing cities, and how we might realize this vision on Toronto's eastern waterfront. They also pledged $50 million, I think that's US, and a year of essentially pro bono work to develop a detailed plan. So they basically fronted the planning of the Quayside, and created a new project vehicle around it called Sidewalk Toronto. Although I don't think that was a legal entity. I think that was just a brand entity. next major milestone, so March of the following year, 2018, Sidewalk Labs hires Anne Cavoukian. She's the former Information and Privacy Commissioner for the Canadian province of Ontario. She's Executive Director of the Privacy and Big Data Institute at Ryerson. She's a distinguished expert in residence at the Privacy by Design Centre of Excellence at Ryerson, and she was retained to advise Sidewalk Labs on their privacy framework. So they recognized right from the outset and in their proposal that privacy was going to be an issue, that ownership and management of all of the data that was going to come out of this testbed had to be done in the public interest, and Sidewalk Labs, along with Waterfront Toronto, were interested in finding new governance models to be able to manage this effectively. And for this reason, they hired Cavoukian, who was a very well-known advocate of privacy by design, and they agreed to adopt privacy by design principles from the outset. So, a core part of privacy by design is that no personally identifiable information is ever collected or is thrown away at source, really. And the Sidewalk Labs proposed an urban data trust to oversee all the data use in the development. So it proposed setting up a new governance mechanism to consist of multiple stakeholders who would have ultimate, would be under the oversight of the City of Toronto, but would essentially have responsibility for ensuring that all of the data, managed and collected in that as part of the project was handled appropriately. And so in October of the same year, Cavoukian resigns from Sidewalk Labs. She's actually immediately hired by Waterfront Toronto to kind of work on the public sector side of the project. But the reason she resigned is because at a meeting, Sidewalk Labs couldn't guarantee that that all of the data was going to be anonymized at source. And what she said was, she said, "I believe they always thought privacy by design was an essential part of the project." So she believes that they were true about that. The challenge came when Sidewalk decided to create the Urban Data Trust, which would democratize control of the immense amount of data they'd planned to collect. Members of the trust would include other tech companies, Waterfront Toronto, and various levels of government. I had no problem with that. However, Sidewalk also decided that it would not or could not compel other members of the trust to de-identify their data. They said they'd encourage them. I never forgot the meeting. I'll never forget the meeting where they announced it. The minute they said that, I knew I had to resign. And that obviously, that created quite a lot of media. The fact that such a high-profile privacy person had resigned from the board overseeing the project on the Sidewalk Labs side over basically an issue of the project not being able to guarantee privacy by design in the implementation. So that's a really key moment, and actually there's more. We don't really have time to go into it in detail, but there's a suggestion that this was really a misunderstanding, and that Sidewalk Labs, because they didn't want to be in control of that board, couldn't say for sure. They weren't able to compel anyone because they weren't responsible for setting up that urban data trust in the first place. They wanted to be stakeholders in it, but they didn't want to be responsible for running it. So there's no way that they would have been able to guarantee this. It's the trust and the government that should have guaranteed that. Anyway, the damage was done, frankly. Then in December 2018, there was an Auditor General report on Waterfront Toronto, which was absolutely scathing about their management practices and poor finance and budget management. They came up with 6 recommendations, 4 recommendations for the Ministry of Infrastructure in oversight, 36 action items. The State of Ontario fired the chair of Waterfront Toronto, Helen Burstyn, and 2 other board members. And the Minister of Infrastructure, who was responsible, who basically it was made responsible for oversight of this, said he was shocked to learn that the board was given 1 weekend to examine the most important transaction in its history before being asked to approve it, in reference to the Sidewalk Toronto proposal. So effectively, the board of Waterfront Toronto was only given a weekend to approve Sidewalk Labs proposal. So this always reeked of an unfair procurement process, not really an open procurement process. But and it resulted in a turnover of management at Waterfront Toronto. February 2019, Block Sidewalk is funded. So all of the various stakeholders in the city that have expressed concerns about the project, especially over data privacy and the role of citizens, and a whole range of other issues, such as whether the affordable housing in the plan is really or in the proposal is really affordable or not. Bear in mind that Sidewalk Labs haven't even released the plans yet. They've only won the contract to produce plans. And Block Sidewalk was not the only campaign group and not the only campaigners, but this is the point at which a lot of the opposition to the project started to really organize around this time. And Block Sidewalk as a campaign organization is kind of an example of that. So their values were that open planning is something that happens between Torontonians and the city, focused on the public interest, that development should benefit the people of Toronto and should respond to the needs of Torontonians as expressed by Torontonians, that development should prioritize the city's needs first, not the needs and interests of a private corporation. Which is kind of at odds with the whole purpose of the project, because the project is supposed to be about innovation and a global supply chain of city innovations. So it's supposed to be trying things that don't necessarily relate to challenges that Toronto is facing, but are challenges that are faced by cities elsewhere. But that was never really dug into sufficiently. Fundamentally, the vast majority of campaigners didn't want citizens to be treated as lab rats in a big experiment by a global corporation. So March 2019, Stephen Diamond is appointed chair of Waterfront Toronto to take over from from the fired chair previously. He's the CEO of Diamond Corp, which is a real estate company. He's a corporate guy and runs a private equity firm, but he has skin in the game. He is he understands how real estate development works, and he changes the behavior in a lot of ways of how Waterfront Toronto is acting and working with Sidewalk Labs. It's much less. Not so much less aligned, but much less chummy, I guess. In April 2019, so not long after he's appointed the chair, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association files a lawsuit against Sidewalk Labs, or actually it files it against the tri-government partners in Waterfront Toronto. So it files it against the nation's government against the state and the city government. With Michael Bryant, the executive director, saying the laboratory of Sidewalk Labs you see is your community. Scientists profit from your behavioral data. Canada, Toronto, you are the lab rats. Eventually, June 2019, Sidewalk Labs issued the MIDP, the Master Innovation Development Plan, to Waterfront Toronto. It's 4 volumes and over 1,500 pages long. It's lots of, obviously there's lots of stuff in there. 160 individual innovations are listed in there. It includes thousands of affordable, supposedly housing units, a manufacturing plant for the special building timber that they're going to build a lot of the infrastructure and buildings out of, 89% lower greenhouse gas emissions than the rest of Toronto, an independent urban data trust to oversee collection and use of data, again, independent, which is why they couldn't guarantee that all of the partners in the Urban Data Trust would implement privacy at source or anonymity at source. A new Canadian headquarters for Google, 54,000 direct jobs, 4.3 billion Canadian dollars worth in annual tax revenue, and 14.2 billion in annual GDP impact by 2040. Total cost estimate to develop Quayside, 1.3 billion Canadian dollars. However, this, as well as being enormous, the the plans also were for the whole of what they called the River District, and which they called Idea District, the Innovation, Design and Economic Acceleration District. So they'd basically expanded the remit, their remit, out of Quayside into the eastern waterfront in order to achieve scale to make the finances work, essentially, or so they argued. They also said they would put up $100 million to finance a waterfront light rail transit service to service the whole area. And the total cost of this light rail service would be around 1.2 billion Canadian dollars on top. And they also proposed that they would be lead developer on the quayside, essentially shunting Waterfront Toronto out of the way. So it wouldn't be Waterfront Toronto that would be issuing RFPs and hiring developers. It would be Sidewalk Labs. So in response to this, Waterfront Toronto issued, Stephen Diamond issued an open letter, basically saying, well, there's lots in here that's very good, but there are threshold issues that if we don't get resolved, we are going to terminate the contract by the end of October this year, essentially, is what he said. And those areas of contention, they're called threshold issues, were the Idea District, Sidewalk Lab as lead developer, the transit plans, and the idea of creating a new governance organization to develop those transit plans, and the proposal around the Urban Data Trust. There was a series of public consultations. Needless to say, people felt they didn't have enough time, and it was very difficult to digest such an enormous amount of information about all of this. But the similar concerns that had been voiced previously by campaigners were just reinforced by this behavior, essentially, and by what was in the plan. And then in October, essentially just before the extension to the plan development agreement ran out at the end of October, Sidewalks Lab basically rolled over and agreed to all of the threshold issues put forward by Waterfront Toronto. They agreed to reduce the scope back to the 12 acres of Quayside, eliminate the urban trust proposal, the urban data trust proposal, and leave data governance to the city completely. Remove call for any new administrative vehicles, especially around the light rail. And they would partner with developers, with Waterfront Toronto leading a competitive public procurement process, and so no longer be the lead developer for Quayside. And then on top of the threshold issues, Sidewalk also agreed to that Waterfront Toronto would receive fair market value for the Quayside lands at the time of sale. So that was another point of issue, was the mechanism by which Waterfront, or essentially the city through Waterfront Toronto, would sell that Quayside land to the lead developer, or sell it to the developers. And so Sidewalk Labs had proposed a mechanism for this, and Waterfront Toronto didn't agree with it, or they didn't agree with fixing the value in advance. They got them to agree to a mechanism at time of sale, which would be in the future once this was approved. They also acknowledged that Waterfront Toronto doesn't have jurisdiction over the approval of capital funding for public transit. This was one of the issues that came up in the audit report, that essentially Waterfront Toronto was representing things that it didn't have legal authority over in regard to land use outside of some of its remit. And not just for the Sidewalk Toronto project either, but it was engaged with it was engaged with a whole load of other projects along the waterfront, and that Sidewalk Labs would expand its patent pledge from Canadian only to global, so that basically any patents produced as part of the test bed that Canadian companies would have access to them on a global basis, and not just for Canada. So that's a really big concession. as is the next one, which is that Waterfront Toronto was entitled to a revenue share on intellectual property based on percentage of revenues, not percentage of profits. So basically, to prevent Sidewalk Labs, hiding revenue, sharing the revenue for intellectual property from gross rather than from their net profit, which they could easily manipulate. So quite a set of concessions, quite an important set of concessions. I'm going to get through this really quickly now. In February, there was round 2 of the consultation subsequent to this. I won't go through this in detail, but there was a technical review, a review of the digital governance plans, partnership and investment plans, and then a whole consultation framework actually as a piece of best practice on how to produce documentation for public consultation. I think this round 2 MIDP evaluation is excellent, really good. It really explains all of that information in those 1,500 plus pages in really simple terms, and provides a really simple way of deciding what, or answering questions about it and understanding what the experts say about them. Also in February, Waterfront Toronto initiated a preliminary human rights review and hire Element AI to look at the human rights implications of creating the testbed. In March, of course, COVID hits and they extend the deadline for approval out to the 25th of June instead of the end of March. The 1st of May, they get the round 2 feedback report, which is essentially the public feedback from that consultation that they launched in January, and the concerns don't really seem to have gone away. And on the 7th of May, Sidewalk Labs pulls out. Doctoroff in his letter about it says, while we won't be pursuing this particular project, the current health emergency makes us feel even more strongly about the importance of reimagining cities for the future. And he says, on these fronts, we've already started innovative companies addressing urban mobility, next generation infrastructure, community-based healthcare. We've invested in startups working on everything from robotic furniture to digital electricity. We continue to work internally on factory-made mass timber construction that can improve housing affordability and sustainability, a digital master planning tool that can improve quality of life outcomes and project economics, and a new approach to all electric neighborhoods. So he's saying, in a sense, he's saying also that Sidewalk Labs or Alphabet feel like they don't need Toronto anymore because they're already pursuing all of these innovations. So they've done all of this work for Quayside, but really, do they need a test bed to do this? Is Quayside the best test bed? Actually, a lot of these technologies need to be tested in other places, potentially. So that's essentially the timeline, a very rapid go through the timeline. It's a very complicated project, obviously, and there's more complexity to it. But I'd like to go through some of the key areas that were points of contention along this. And the first one is data governance. I think the legacy of this project is that people are going to remember it for being a battle over data and the rights of citizens over their data. And certainly that was a big part of this. So we can ask questions about how valid those concerns were. Was Sidewalk Labs really pursuing surveillance capitalism as it's described often? Had those concerns been adequately addressed in the process by basically taking Google and Alphabet and Sidewalk Labs out of the equation of establishing the governance mechanisms around the data, divorcing them from the data and having them agree to that as part of the threshold issues. What about urban data in other parts of the city? A lot of this was about urban data as part of this test bed, but one of the big issues about this was that essentially people didn't trust Sidewalk Labs, they didn't trust Google. They trusted Google to have the ability to aggregate, integrate, and monetize the data that was being produced. And I think that's the difference. Like in other parts, in other areas, people aren't too concerned when when other integrators and developers put sensors in, because nobody trusts their ability to really integrate and monetize that data, even though they might be doing it. And even though people don't know what's happening with that data, and even though they don't conform to any kind of, publicly accessible governance, let alone privacy by design principles. But because it was Google, and because this is where it came to head, and it was rammed home continually, partly by Apple. This image is an image of billboards that went up in Quayside, right next to Sidewalk Labs engagement center, by Apple, saying we're in the business of staying out of yours, and touting their credentials as the tech brand of privacy, because what goes on your phone stays on your phone. Apple's business model does not involve the monetization of data the way that Google's does. It involves selling software and hardware. That's where they make their money, and taking a commission on everything that's sold through the App Store. Those are their big revenue streams. They do not use your data, and they have integrated that into the way that their hardware even operates. And they were making a big point about this, and kind of reinforcing the mistrust towards Google and Sidewalk Labs as well. COVID-19, did it really change the landscape? Was it the downturn in the real estate market, or did they maybe realize that their urban vision wouldn't protect people from pandemics, and really that they'd missed anything to do with this kind of threat? Or was it the process, the accusations of obfuscation, overreach, poor transparency, the fallout from the Auditor General's report? Was the process compromised from the beginning in terms of the procurement of this project? Had those issues been addressed adequately by early 2020, and did people even realize that they had been? Was it campaigners? Was it just derailed by campaigners with an anti-business and anti-American agenda from the start? Could we say that Toronto just rejected a perceived invasion by a foreign body? And did the lack of movement in public opinion, even after agreeing to all the threshold issues in October, play a factor? So that report at the beginning of May that really showed that people's opinion hadn't changed that much, despite a big set of concessions, play a factor. Was the project just too ambitious, and did it try to do it in too small a space? Could it not monetize it? Were they constantly having to find ways of making it financially viable given the parameters of the project? Is this why the scope creeped and it was so contentious? And did this ambition manifest itself in other ways? The Sidewalk Labs were very often accused of being arrogant, and sometimes justifiably. Were there deeper issues? Did the principal actors in this project just fail to understand the underlying concerns around exploitation that were being expressed by citizens? And quite often it's difficult for people to express the fear of exploitation, so it comes out in lots and lots of different ways and different forms, whether it's around data or about the affordability of housing, or the innovations that are being proposed not really being relevant to the city or whatever. But fundamentally, there's a feeling that people are being exploited that needed to be addressed. And much of the argument on the pro side was around risk and reward, and fear of Toronto being left behind, and the desire for Toronto to join the pantheon of global cities. Whereas much of the argument on the con side and from campaigners was around describing what was actually at risk to people, trying to describe this feeling that they had of being exploited, which was never really addressed in the behaviors. So was it all just too top down? Was there not enough consultation, and certainly not enough co-design? Was it just a vision held and expressed by experts in an era where they're increasingly mistrusted and co-design and collaboration is becoming the norm? And was it about values and behaviors? Did Waterfront Toronto, at least initially, and Sidewalk Labs behave in ways that reinforce these concerns instead of alleviate them? Did their actions form a pattern that played into the fears of citizens and accusations of campaigners? Were the wider global objectives of the project too intangible or strategic to really consult citizens with? And were these poor behavior patterns evident right from the start of the project? And we can see what supposed values were being expressed. These are Sidewalk Labs' values. And fundamentally, is Toronto just not a smart city? Was Toronto not the right city for this project because it didn't have enough capacity and capability in place already, enough structure to be able to manage such a project properly in the first place? Those are my provocations. I'm going to open it up while we still got a few minutes for Q&A. So I'll hand it back to you, Joanna.
Yes, thank
you.
you.
Can lead.
Hi there again. Thank you, Chris. That was very interesting. I did not know any of the details. I actually, meanwhile, I'll talk a bit, but feel free to raise any questions or comments. Don't be shy. Okay, fine. I know it's. I always have to start because people are always shy and shy in the beginning, but then they open up. So come on, just write it down. I did want to ask if you think, Chris, that maybe the fact that we had, or they had, such a broad plan, that was the scary part of it for its citizens. You know, maybe the projects themselves, if looked at from an individual point of view, they wouldn't scare people so much. But suddenly, you just imagine that entire region in the hands of a certain company that probably does already scare you a bit, and suddenly it turns into this big issue and this big monster, you know? But then if you really look at the detail of it, it's not that we are talking about anything that is much different from what we have already. I mean, that your data is collected already. It's not that we are less exposed than what I've saw there in their plans, don't you think?
Yeah, I think there's so much tied up in that. I think people were concerned right from the outset. I think they saw it as a thin end of the wedge. You know, they saw it as a beachhead for a global corporation to get a foothold in the city, and just as the beginning of a spread and a way of doing things and a way of living that, you know, I think a lot of campaigners felt they had to reject as soon as possible before it even happened, because it would be much harder to reject later.
Yeah.
And I think there's some validity in that. I think the project was doomed from the start, to be honest. I think it's very difficult. I think also there's this kind of there's a kind of a self-perception issue as well. I think people at Sidewalk Labs, they tended to be urbanists. You know, they assembled a team of urbanists. They didn't really have technologists. Most people assumed that because they're Sidewalk Labs and they're part of Alphabet, that they really know technology and digital technology, and they really understand how Google works. But I don't think that's really true. I think they were really naive in a lot of ways, and that's because they were mainly urbanists. They were basically urbanists given an opportunity to really play and express their creativity, which is problematic anyway, because it's a very top-down view of
approach. Yes.
You know, the approach of designing environments for other people to live in is very alienating thing, and it always has been. You know, essentially, it's one of the big problems with urban design.
Yes.
So I think that was a factor in it as well. They didn't understand their own, how they were perceived, and how technology companies, how the perception of technology companies had become so negative over the last decade either.
Definitely, yeah. But I mean, it's also about the word lab itself. For me, if I lived in there, it would be a bit offending. You know, don't come and experiment with me in my own community. I don't want you experimenting with me. You know? Although maybe at the end, and this is the funny thing, and we see that a lot with smart cities issues, that in the end, it is for the well-being, or to increase people's well-being, or in general, the idea, the end, the outcome of it would be positive for the community, not negative. But somehow it seems that, you know, we have communities all over the world. I think this is a world characteristic, a global characteristic. We have our own sense of land and of being the owners of our own space, and it's just a bit creepy to have somebody else coming in and tell you how to live, where to live, in which kind of building. And I think so. I think it's at the end, it's a bit irrational. Also, this feeling of just rejecting the project, the company. It's a bit irrational at the end. Um, but it's true that it exists. No? I think that maybe because you see, after all the changes that occurred and the way they modified the project, and I mean what they sacrificed in terms of the project was a lot already. So rationally, it seemed to me that at that point um, there was no reason not to go forward with that, with the project. So it must have been something very irrational.
Yes, I agree. I would agree with that analysis. Yeah, I think in terms of people's perception, I don't think their fears were ever addressed, and I think you're right. I think the objectives of the whole thing were alien or alienated from the needs of citizens in the first place. I mean, not many people live in that area, but some do. But the objectives for it were, or they were business and profile related. It was about economic development. It was about international status. It was, and in a lot of the kind of commentary and talk about this from the city, both politicians and the business community, it was like, this is a no-brainer. Like, why wouldn't we take this bit of almost derelict land, this wasted land, and turn it into something that is going to be hugely profitable for the city? It's going to bring in lots of tax revenue that we can fund social programs and everything else with. But that kind of thinking was never incorporated into any way of getting citizens on board. Like, there was never a suggestion that they could galvanize the citizens of Toronto to be part of an effort to solve urban problems worldwide, right? I
Yes,
mean,
right.
people could have felt like they were part of solving problems around the world. They were part of solving problems in India and in Southeast Asia and South America. They could have been an exciting thing to be part of. But ultimately, you're right. It was irrational, and I think the evidence of that is that even when all of the rational objections were addressed, people still rejected it. People still weren't convinced because emotionally they didn't want Google coming in and turning the place into a lab.
They're a lab, yes. So it's not. I don't think it doesn't seem to me that it was an issue as a Toronto issue. Maybe if this had been done in another city, same thing would have happened. I don't know. It really depends on the culture, obviously, of communities. But
Well, yeah, I think Google realized there are far easier places to do it than Toronto.
yeah, maybe. But the truth is that in some way, I think that for this is tricky for all smart cities projects, right? Because in a way, you should be able to sell it to the community, and people that live in that city should be able to see the humanistic side of the projects. But at the same time, you should and you do need to make the project attractive to private companies also, because that's obviously their goal as an enterprise to make profit. So they won't be investing and working on anything that doesn't end up in some kind of positive income for them. So it's very difficult. It seems to me it's very difficult to reach this balance between the humanistic part of the project and the profitable part of it.
Yeah, I think there's a few aspects to that. One is that I think one of the things that we can learn from this is one of the things that I feel were very obvious throughout was that this was all about trying to build a smart city in isolation in one little tiny area. And actually, that last slide about just Toronto wasn't smart enough as a city to be able to do this. I think that's true, and I think that's what cities need to understand. They need to create the right environment for things like this to be successful, and that involves a lot of prior capacity building, and not just selling the idea to people, but to get more of their population to understand what the issues really are. I mean, you need to have well-informed citizens that can see the problems with it within the city already. You know, it's not good enough to just say, here's a bit of land, make it smart. You need to say, we have done all of this work and all of these people are engaged in understanding what our biggest challenges are. And we have the data, and our citizens are collecting the data, and we are all working collaboratively on trying to understand what the problems are so that we can create integrated solutions to them. Will you help us as our innovation and funding partner? Would have been a completely different proposition. I mean, for one thing, they may have realized that Google or Alphabet wasn't a great partner in the first place, because they would already had a program and that kind of feedback. But I think that's really crucial. It took them essentially 5 years to realize that they needed to have an institution in the city that was responsible for the management of urban data, and that couldn't be led by the contractor. It had to be put in place by the city through democratic processes of governance. Now, that's a lesson that all cities should learn. This is the same problem in India with the 100 Smart Cities program and other things. A lot of these are very isolated, and really they need transformation of the way cities are governed first before these things can work properly. Are you still there, Joanna? You may have frozen. Oh no. Can you hear me?
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi. Yes, sorry, I lost connection for a bit in there.
Okay.
It's strange.
Well, I hope everybody can hear me.
Yes, I think so. I think it was my issue. Sorry, my daughter. uh, no, yes. I didn't hear the last bit of what you said, but you were talking about how they should have realized that it took them 5 years to realize that maybe just Google wasn't the partner to lead this project. Right?
Yeah, I was saying it took them 5 years to realize that the city needed to establish a new institution to manage urban data. You know, that it wasn't something that they should leave to the contractor or something minor. And I believe every city needs to do this. Every city needs to create an institution, a body, an organization that is democratically governed and that has responsibility for how urban data is collected and used, and upholds the digital rights of citizens. And I think there's a lot of kind of preparation that needs to happen in order for cities to be able to tender for projects like this and to have them be successful. And they can't just be isolated. And this is a problem that we see around the world. You know, India's smart city program, for example, a lot of it is area-based development projects, which are just these few blocks make them smart, these few blocks make them smart, build a smart road there, you know, and it's not integrated as part of a whole set of transformative measures and projects to get the city into the right place to be able to actually do this properly and have it be successful. And part of that is data governance, and part of that is engagement with citizens and understanding the challenges they face.
I think we are in a phase of a very initial phase of first of all informing citizens of what data is actually collected and why, and what's the goal of it after all, because I don't think that people in general are aware, and we are not aware of why or how our data is used really, so that creates the fact that we don't know it creates a certain fear, which is understandable. And I think that indeed we need to approach that first in order to be able to develop them projects and just have people accept them. But yes, that's such a big challenge.
Well, I mean, just the idea that Sidewalk Labs would accept privacy by design and would accept, you know, for their own data and the data of all of their innovations, you know, anonymity at source. So you know, they are only interested in aggregate data. Now, aggregate data can be de-anonymized, and people need to understand that. And there's been some very famous examples of this in New York, which I'm sure Daniel Doctorow knows about, where they opened up all of their taxi data and people started working out where people lived and where shows were on, and could figure out where celebrities had been, and then from the data set figure out whether they tipped or not, or how much they tipped, and then publish that information, you know.
Yes, it's crazy.
These kind of things are possible, but
Yes.
but
But
that's exactly the
luckily,
kind
it's
sorry.
not the goal. No, luckily that's not the goal of most projects. And I mean, we are also in a learning curve, and obviously, you know, same happened now with the pandemic, that, you know, with Zoom, we also we use a lot of platforms for online classes and webinars. And it was incredible how people suddenly, everybody turned to Zoom, and suddenly there was a lot of issues with the data protection that we didn't have before, of course, because now lots of people are using it. So now, you know, people, hackers actually want a bit of it, when
Right.
before it wasn't even a thing. And so this is a bit, what happens with technology overall and with development overall, that there's always a certain risk. And the bigger the project, the bigger the interest also for hackers and bad people, to take
Yeah.
advantage of the projects. But we just need to, you know, overcome those barriers after all.
Yeah,
So
I don't think sorry to interrupt, but I don't
no,
think Waterfront Toronto or the City of Toronto had any idea of how far they would need to go to resolve some of these issues. So in the stipulations as part of the threshold issues agreement was not just that I didn't go into this in detail because, you know, time, but it was not just that Sidewalk Labs would remove the urban data trust and references to it from their proposal, but that they would guarantee that no data would be held outside of Canadian territory. And then even that wasn't enough. And you know, I think it was DSAP, the Digital Advisory, or DA, the Digital Advisory Panel, started saying, well, what about data that is routed through America? And this was the problem with Zoom, right? It was that the data was being routed through China. And if data is routed through somewhere, as we know, it becomes subject to intelligence
attack.
agencies doing
Yes.
deep packet inspection, and, you know, PRISM and the NSA. That was the concern, that any of this data could be interrogated by the American intelligence service if it was routed through American soil. So, you know, it was really, this became like a national security issue. And a lot of this infrastructure is a national security issue.
It
And it
is, it
should
is, yes.
go our way in the infrastructure or not. You know, this is, so people who are used to doing real estate deals suddenly found themselves in this whole other environment of policy making that they really didn't understand or prepare for. And I think that's
Yes,
the nature of smart cities. That's where we need to get to.
indeed. Very good, Chris. This is a very nice example, and thank you so much for sharing your information on the project. I think that we can all agree that it failed, but I mean, it's a good learning example also for future projects. And for sure, from now on, companies will definitely think about concerns of the communities before they present anything whatsoever, and invest money and so much time. So thank you so much for bringing this example to us.
You're welcome.
And thank you all that participated. People didn't want to make questions, but they're here. So I guess our debate was enough. Anyways, if anybody has any other questions or comments, feel free to just write to us. You'll receive an email from our side, from Zigurat, afterwards. So you can always contact us. And, you know, Chris, He's one of our professors, so we have contact with him
Yeah,
regularly.
if anyone's got any questions about Sidewalk Lab they'd like to ask me subsequently, then yeah, just get in touch and I'll reply when I get time.
Perfect.
That'd be great.
Thanks so much, Chris, for being here today and for presenting this project. And thank you, everybody, for participating. We see you in one of our next masterclasses. Just pay attention to the newsletter. We also we have masterclasses from all master programs. So if you just subscribe to the newsletter, you'll get one monthly newsletter. It's not too much. Well, we'll inform about all masterclasses of the following month. So stay tuned. Thank you, Chris. Have a nice day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.